Well, come on in. Come on. Don't be scared. You are in the principal's office. I'm your host, Michelle Pennix, and I'm so excited you're here today. Today, for the next 30 minutes, we get to the bottom of the issue, and the issue is always education. The issue is always topics in education that affect the Black community the most and our children differently than anyone else. We're here to make sure that we have an honest and thorough discussion, and is always solution focused. This is where our guests come to explain themselves and their views about so many different topics as it relates to education. So come on in. Again, we're glad you're here. I'm Michelle Pennix, or Principal Pennix to most. And for the next 30 minutes, we're going to have a chance to talk about all the things that matter most in your child's education. Today's topic is actually the end of a discussion that we've been having for several weeks now about NTI and virtual learning and what that means for our community, especially now as we enter this time where NTI has been extended indefinitely, not knowing when our children will return or even if they will return to school during the 2021 school year. And so today we thought we'd step back and we take a listen to some of your questions, some of your complaints, and try to get right into it with answering those questions. And again, to give you solutions that will help you in the days ahead. We're excited you're here. Let's dig straight in. So our first questions are coming from two different places. One is going to be Twitter and one is going to be Facebook. And then I even threw in a third. I had some statements made by some fellow colleagues of mine, past principals, past administrators here in JCPS, that wanted to make sure that some of their concerns were heard about our community of learners and our families during this most critical time. So we're going to start with a question that was posed on Twitter about NTI. Again, as we enter this uncertain season of time for NTI, it becomes important for us to think about exactly what that means for next steps. This parent wrote that they were processing because they themselves took 2 summer courses with NTI and related some of the takeaways and wanted to know the importance of why students need to turn on their cameras. She says that she was in this class and there were times where she was eating and had to turn off her camera only to be asked to turn it back on, and felt like her students had been put in that same situation. So I'll say firsthand, there are a lot of pros and cons, and it actually depends on the age of the child. One of the things that I found working with children in hubs and in the community over the past several weeks in around NTI has been that the younger the child, the more important it is to provide some structure and some organization around eating, especially with their Chromebook. For the most obvious reasons with young children. I've seen young children have their breakfast and their lunch beside them as they're eating, whether they're at home with their parent or whether they're in a hub with several people, as a way to kind of do 2 things at once. And again, obviously, when you've got young children, you've got pancake syrup and a Chrome board and a device. And that's not a good mix. You've also got maybe the wrapping or the packaging that can cause extra noise on the Zoom or on the Google Meet NTI classroom. As you get older, that doesn't become such a big issue. It all depends too on your child themselves and whether smacking when they eat, chewing with their mouth open, all of that is an issue. I would say that if the camera is on and your child is expected to have the camera on in their class, that eating is not a good thing to do. All right, next question. I don't like comments on student surroundings. I've just finished a big remodel in our house, and we have lots of junk and boxes all around. And the teacher asked my child, or said to my child, clean up in your area, be a good citizen. Now, that's not appropriate. I don't believe at all. I don't think that any comments made around the surroundings of a child on NTI, or even adult for that matter, is anyone's business. You don't know their situation. We just ourselves as a family went through a big renovation and things all over our house at all times. That's not the focus, and it shouldn't be. And I would say that anybody who says anything about that is doing it for one of two reasons. One, they're being nosy, or two, they're just trying to exert some power and control. And neither of those things belong in the classroom. So when it comes to whether or not students should hear comments about their background or be are required to straighten up, that's a big no-no. That's a big no-no, and one we shouldn't listen to at all. Use the mute all the time. Is that necessary? Well, again, one of the things that I would suggest is that the teacher in this situation use the ability to mute and unmute all guests on their own. That is something that I see also as a common issue, is that usually it starts out on mute and then the child themselves is going back and forth in unmuting and muting themselves. Instead, the teacher should be the one that's actually controlling that environment and making sure that they unmute students as they want to speak. Now, I can tell you too, from a personal experience, not teaching an NTI class, but in a church setting. At our church, when we meet on Zoom, we have everybody on mute. Unless it is a time of the service where we feel like we would be furthering the Spirit of God to have everyone's voice at the same time. So it all depends on the setting, but again, the teacher, that is something that they can control and would benefit the students. So you want to make sure you do that. Next question comes to how long should a class go that is live? I'll tell you again, this depends on the attention span and the age of the child as well. The younger the child, the shorter the lessons. And by that I'm saying, if you think about, in all honesty, probably about 10 minutes for every grade level as you move up in terms of length. And by grade level, I mean elementary, middle, and high school. So it is not appropriate, I don't believe, for there to be any longer than a 30 to 45 minute live session for elementary age children. Really, once you start pushing that 30-minute mark, if not even before, time and attention starts declining very rapidly. After that 30-minute point, attention begins to waver. Now, this is true even in the classroom. In the actual classroom, we talked about modeling and having live conversations with children in the classroom that lasted less than 20 minutes at the elementary age. If I ever walked into a classroom and observed a lesson and the teacher was doing the talking for 45 or 50 minutes, that means that she was the one doing the learning and not the students. When you move up into middle school, you might be able to stretch that to 45 minutes to an hour, but again, that should be extremely interactive. No adult should be talking longer than 5 to 10 minutes to the student. I would even say in some cases 2 to 3 minutes before there's not some sort of opportunity to respond. So then when you go to the high school, again, I think that time is pretty similar to what it is for middle school, 45 minutes to an hour, maybe sometimes stretching it depending on the content and the opportunities to respond. I can say that personally. My daughter's a sophomore in college, and I've watched her on her live sessions, and usually after about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on what the topic is, her attention begins to wane as well. So it really is dependent on the teacher, the content, but most importantly, again, the attention span of the students, what needs to be covered, and the most efficient way to do that would be able to keep in those time parameters as suggested. So that's something to include. All right, then we talked about, let's say students know what the end goal is of the session. Is that important in helping them stay focused? It absolutely is. If you've ever listened to a sermon, you know that the pastor always begins with a title that usually draws you in. It's no different than the classroom. You should always hear what our goal is today, and that's especially important with NTI, and let me tell you why. A lot of settings and a lot of families and hubs don't have always the opportunity to attend the live session in full. They may only be able to be there for a short time, and that may be at the beginning of the lesson. But as a teacher, as a parent, as a guardian of students in NTI, what you want to do is be able to hear at the beginning of the lesson, this is what today's lesson is going to be. We're going to be learning how to round numbers. We're going to be learning the theme of a story. We're going to be learning these concepts. That way, if I have to step away, then I'm able to focus my child's attention on learning that concept maybe at a later time. So it's very important that we begin those conversations. All right, so our next question actually comes from Facebook. And on Facebook, we had a comment. This wasn't so much a question, but this parent said that they were so distracted and frustrated, upset, and even used another word to describe their feelings at NTI. This person has 3 kids while trying to work at home. She said she checked their report cards and busted out crying. Even with an honor student, she got 2 low C's and she's frustrated. I have to make her quit her job at work because they don't Zoom, only call, and they don't use whiteboard, they only talk. My son started middle school during this pandemic, and I feel like he's been hung out to dry. My daughter is going into high school, and I feel she's been hung out to dry. All the time, I feel like I'm failing them since school started, and I don't know what to do. My kids are my only sensitive spot. Well, to this parent, what I'll say is, 1, you're not failing them. No one knew that this season was to come. No one knew and could predict that we'd be in this pandemic. And although there's been a failure in the terms of leadership and how we've progressed through this time, you have to know that you are not alone. You are doing the best you can do, and that's all that matters during this season. Now, part of that best is finding resources and support wherever it may be. But I'll tell you, that leads to another comment made by someone in response to that said she keeps asking herself, where is the village? Where are all the teachers that should and could help? I keep asking myself, why won't they put something together? I'll even volunteer my time and money to help our children be successful. This is hard on us all. Well, let me speak from both perspectives. The teachers are there. They have been asked to create something out of absolutely nothing. You have to remember that for many staffs in our school system, not only in JCPS, but around the country, computer knowledge in terms of all of the instructional tools is not even commonplace. Many of our teachers had not been Google certified. Many of them had not been forced to keep up, if you will, with technology at those rates for some things. But as far as instruction online, that was totally new. And because this caught most people off guard in terms of the quickness, if you will, that teachers had to transition, it's been a real struggle for them. So we want to keep positive. We want to make sure that our comments around our kids are extremely positive because they will feed off of what you say. If they overhear that type of frustration in your voice and negativity toward parents, it will absolutely be translated to their interaction with their teacher on NTI or even their lack of attention. Saying that, it's much easier to tune out when your parent is dissatisfied with something and saying it doesn't really matter. Which brings me to this point, because one of the things that I'm noticing is that in many families, I think that they made a decision at the beginning of this year not to really get too involved with NTI. The thought was, I'm too busy, I can't be there with them. When I am, I don't want to spend that time fighting and in argument with my son, not being comfortable myself with NTI and how to log them on. Many parents don't feel even comfortable asking their children, how do I get on? What do I do? They're having to be led by their children, and that's a first-time experience for many adults. Usually it's the other way around. The adult is teaching the child, the parent is teaching the child, but for many adults, it's just switched. And so that's a very uncomfortable position to be in. Now, when that happens, I think a lot of them have just tuned out. And it's unfortunate, but it is a reality. It's not an excuse, it's a reason. And so considering that, one of the things that I'd caution you to do is, one, make sure that you support parents during this transition as well, as you support teachers. Parents, it's very, very important that you get back in the game. And I think that's what many are doing, but just now. They may have had that attitude, they may have had that thought, oh, we'll wait. And then when the word came out that October 22nd was a real possibility for many of our families to return to school, I think those same parents said, okay, I don't have to worry about it. October 22nd, we'll put it back in the hands of parent or teachers and it'll move on. And then October 22nd came and there is no school. And so now there's this mad rush or panic on the part of many families to take school seriously when they've ignored it for most of this school year already. And so there's a mad dash for hubs and for tutors and for people that can help their children, because they realize without the type of support that they need, it may be months before their child goes back to school and they're really left behind. So we encourage you to encourage them not to give up, but also to provide as much assistance as possible, because there is a village. And if you're a believer, you know that this too shall pass, as a comment that I read from somebody. This too shall pass. Now, I also say that this takes us back to a conversation we've had before about homeschooling. This show started and my conversations in the community began around the concept of, between the racial injustice experiences that Louisville, Kentucky was having, plus the pandemic, that this was the season to homeschool your child. It's not too late. You can homeschool your child at any point in time. Now, I think that might eliminate some frustration because it takes that technology and that time piece out. So if you feel like you are constantly being pushed in a corner and you are constantly stressed, you feel like you're not keeping up, even though that is the case for everyone. If it is bothering you to that point, I would highly suggest homeschooling your child. Now, what that can mean at the very least is meaning you availing yourself to resources that may include worksheets and conversations at grade level. You can go into any mass store in our community, Walmart or Amazon or anywhere else, and ask for a third grade math book, a second grade reading book, that you sit down at your convenience with your child and work through each and every page. Google, YouTube videos to help explain concepts that may be difficult for you. That is not held against your child. You can re-enroll at any time in JCPS when you want to, and your child will be just as supported and just as caught up, if you will, as every other child. So that is a real option if it is becoming a real stressor for you during this season. But there is also a vast community of homeschool African American parents who will provide resources and support through social media sites as well. Facebook has countless homeschool pages dedicated to parents just like yourself. Take advantage of that. So there is a real option there. It's also not too late to join with other families to start a hub. It's also not too late to ask your school board, your superintendent, your schools to help support your need for more hubs in your community. So that's an important time for us to recognize during this season. Also, just recently, JCPS opened up a resource center at the Humana building downtown. Although they are not teaching kids at that center, they are providing additional support and resources that you can take advantage of. What we're trying to say is we don't want you to be backed in a corner. We don't want you to feel like there is no hope and that your child is behind. Remember, at the very beginning of this season, I spoke with you about even thinking that your child is behind. The question is, behind what? Behind who? Your child, like every other child, is special and has a special plan for their life. It is not based on what a system says your child should be like at the age of 7 or how far along they should be. So don't put that burden on yourself. Instead, look at your child, decide what your child needs, and make the best decision not only for your child, but for your family as a whole. Finally, today, so much good advice has come from, again, Facebook and again from Twitter, the questions that were asked. I'll tell you that the group of people I was working with earlier today had ideas and thoughts around what families need to do and parents. And we had quite a big debate, I will tell you, about whether or not to even talk about these, because every situation is different. And these were tips that they experienced in working with their own grandchildren during NTI and the things that they saw happening on screen during NTI. Things like parents having to be told to make sure to wake up your child. So your child is on NTI, there's a parent in the room, and the child is dozing off. And the suggestion was, make sure your child has a good night's sleep. Well, when the parent's in the room, that's one thing. But a lot of times our children are not being supervised by a parent or a guardian. They're on that all on their own. So I bring up that point because I really want you to think about the comments, the suggestions you make to all people who are working so hard during this time. And that first starts with our kids. Think about what we say to our children about their performance on NTI and what your family expectations are. But there's an old saying that what gets expected must be inspected. What gets expected must be inspected. And if it cannot be inspected, you can't expect it. So think about that. If you don't have a way to set the expectation and support them, it's not fair to judge them for what they can and cannot do. If you as a family have not set the expectations for what should be happening on NTI, if you as a school and as a community have not done that, it's important to do that. So the kids need some patience. Our teachers need a lot of patience. They've been asked to create something out of absolutely nothing. They've never done this before. And many of them are doing it with their own children in the same room at the same time. Finally, our parents need a lot of support during this time. They are most uncomfortable during this season, even as opposed to the children, because they have expectations that they want to put on their child for their performance. At the same time, many of them are working, many of them can't be at home, many of them are receiving phone calls about whether or not their child is on the incredible burden they've placed on themselves. So with all that being said, it's important that you know the best thing that you can do is to be the village that we talked about, to support one another during this season. So with that being said, I'm Michelle Pennix, or Principal Pennix to most. That's a wrap for today. You've been the best. This conversation continues week to week, same place, same time next week, as we'll discuss the issues that are most important to the Black community and our education. Until then, and as always, to God be the glory.